I stood on stone steps gripping a loudspeaker, my voice tearing through the cold November night. Eradicate Christianity. 200 supporters chanted behind me, fists raised, cameras flashing in the darkness. We had surrounded this Catholic church in southern Europe to send a message they couldn't ignore. Stop converting our people. Stop your lies about Jesus being God. Stop everything. And we weren't leaving until they understood. I was a Saudi prince, educated in 3 countries, wealthy beyond measure, protected by power that most men only dream of. And I had never been more certain about anything in my entire life. But when those heavy church doors finally opened, what emerged shattered everything I thought I knew about power, faith, and the nature of God itself. Have you ever been so convinced you were defending the truth that you never imagined you could be the one who was blind? My heart pounded as the crowd's energy surged around me. The church bells had stopped ringing. The silence felt like surrender. I expected police barricades. I expected priests with their own megaphones, ready to argue. I expected confrontation, conflict, maybe even violence. My name is Prince Khalid Al Faisal, and I was born into a family that had defended Islam for centuries. That's what everyone told me from the moment I could understand words. That's what I believed was written into my very bloodline. I had no idea that in just 3 weeks, everything I knew about God, truth, and my own identity would be torn apart and rebuilt into something I never could have imagined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened that night, to understand why it destroyed me and remade me, you need to know where I came from. You need to see the world I was raised in, the beliefs that were woven into every part of my identity, and the moment I first decided that Christianity was an enemy that needed to be confronted. The royal palace in Riyadh was 2 miles from our family estate. I heard the call to prayer echoing from the Grand Mosque 5 times, every day from the moment I was born. My father, Prince Faisal Al Saud, was an advisor to the king and a scholar of Islamic law. My mother came from a family of religious teachers who could trace their lineage back to the Prophet's companions. I wasn't just raised Muslim. I was raised to be a defender of Islam, publicly, intellectually, politically. When I was 6 years old, my father woke me before dawn for the first time. The palace was dark and cold. I remember rubbing my eyes, confused, wanting to go back to sleep. But my father's hand on my shoulder was firm. A prince does not sleep while his people pray, he said. A prince leads, even in the darkness. That lesson stayed with me forever. My family's lineage traced back 7 centuries, an unbroken line of Islamic leadership, scholarship, and protection of the faith. My great-grandfather had been an advisor to the founder of the modern Saudi state. My grandfather had helped establish Islamic universities across 3 continents. My father served as both a royal advisor and a scholar of Islamic jurisprudence. We didn't just believe in Islam. We were its guardians. Every morning before school, my father taught me about our responsibility. Leadership, he explained, wasn't about wealth or title. It was about protection. Protection of our land from invasion. Protection of our traditions from corruption. Protection of our faith from enemies who smiled while they destroyed you from within. The most dangerous enemy, he told me when I was 8, is the one who comes offering help. He was talking about Christianity. In our home, Christianity wasn't just another religion, it was a strategic threat. My father showed me maps of the Muslim world, pointing to places where churches had appeared near refugee camps, worker housing, poor neighborhoods. He explained the pattern. First comes charity, then comes friendship, then comes conversion. Christians had been doing this for centuries, he said. They disguised conquest as compassion. I learned to see churches the way a soldier sees enemy positions. My education reinforced everything my father taught me. At the Islamic Academy in Riyadh, I studied the Quran and Islamic law with the kingdom's finest teachers. I memorized not just verses, but the historical arguments against Christianity, how their scriptures had been corrupted, how the Trinity was polytheism disguised as monotheism, how Jesus was merely a prophet, not God. By the time I was 16, I could dismantle Christian theology in Arabic, English, and French. My father sent me to study political philosophy at the London School of Economics. Know your enemy, he said. Learn how they think. Learn how they operate. London opened my eyes in ways my father never intended. I saw churches everywhere, not just old cathedrals, but new ones. Storefront churches in immigrant neighborhoods. Services in Urdu, Arabic, Somali. Christians weren't just preaching to Europeans anymore. They were targeting us. I spent 3 years in London, then 2 more studying international relations in Geneva. Everywhere I went, the pattern repeated. Churches near refugee centers. Christian NGOs offering job training. Migrant workers quietly disappearing from Friday prayers and reappearing in Sunday services. To me, these weren't acts of kindness. They were acts of infiltration. The final piece fell into place during my last month in Geneva. A colleague mentioned a Catholic church in southern Europe. He couldn't remember exactly where. That was running special programs for Arab migrants. Arabic Mass. Free meals. Legal aid for asylum seekers. Even Muslim volunteers helping with the programs. I felt my chest tighten with anger. This was exactly what my father had warned me about. Charity first. Friendship second. Conversion third. They were using poverty and desperation as weapons, offering help to people too vulnerable to resist. And they were doing it openly, proudly, as if it was something noble. I made calls. I did research. I found the church, a small Catholic parish near the Mediterranean coast, running programs that attracted dozens of Arab families every week. Someone had to stop them. Someone had to send a message that this kind of manipulation wouldn't be tolerated. Someone had to defend Islam publicly, loudly, unmistakably. I decided that someone would be me. Within a week, I had organized the protest. Within 2 weeks, I had 200 supporters ready to travel. We would surround that church. We would expose their tactics. We would make them stop. I believed God would be pleased with my zeal. I had no idea I was about to meet him face to face. We arrived just as the sun was setting on a cold Friday evening in late November. The church stood at the end of a narrow cobblestone street. Old stone walls, arched doorways, a small bell tower silhouetted against the darkening sky. Light glowed from the windows inside. I could hear voices singing something in Arabic. That made my anger burn hotter. They were using our language to steal our people. I stepped out of the lead vehicle, and my supporters gathered around me. 200 men and women, some who had driven 6 hours to be here. Some had taken time off work. Others had brought their families. They trusted me. They believed this was righteous. The protest was completely legal. I'd made sure of that. Permits filed. Lawyers consulted. Media notified. I wanted this public. I wanted it documented. I wanted everyone who saw it to understand that Islam would not be quiet while Christianity preyed on vulnerable Muslims. I lifted the loudspeaker to my mouth. Christianity is a lie. My voice echoed off the surrounding buildings. The crowd erupted. Their voices joined mine, growing louder with each repetition. God has no son. Eradicate Christianity. The chants rolled through the street like thunder. Some supporters held signs in Arabic and English. Others recorded everything on their phones. This would spread across social media within hours. Muslims worldwide would see that someone was finally taking a stand. I felt powerful. I felt righteous. I felt certain that God was pleased with my zeal. Inside the church, the singing stopped. I expected sirens. I expected police to arrive and try to disperse us. I was prepared for that. We had lawyers on standby, statements ready for the press. I expected priests to come out with their own megaphones, angry, defensive, ready to argue. I had spent years preparing for those arguments. I knew every verse they'd quote, every claim they'd make. I could dismantle them all. I expected confrontation. The church bells began to ring for evening prayer, and then suddenly stopped mid-chime. The silence was jarring. Even our chanting faltered for a moment, confused by the abrupt quiet. An airy pause settled over the crowd. I raised the loudspeaker again, ready to break the silence with another chant. But before I could speak, I heard something else, the heavy wooden doors of the church creaking open. Here it comes, I thought. Here comes the confrontation. The doors swung wide. But what emerged wasn't what I expected at all. No megaphones. No anger. No defensive priests shouting back at us. Instead, a line of clergy and volunteers stepped out into the cold evening air, moving slowly, deliberately, peacefully. They weren't empty-handed. They carried lanterns that cast warm light across the dark street. They carried thick blankets folded over their arms. They carried large trays covered with steam rising into the cold air. Food. The crowd's chanting stuttered and died. Confusion rippled through our ranks. This wasn't the script. This wasn't how confrontations worked. One elderly priest walked directly toward me. He was thin, maybe 70 years old, wearing simple black robes. His face was weathered, his hair white. But his eyes were clear and calm. He didn't look intimidated. He didn't look angry. He looked concerned. For me. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that I could see his breath-forming clouds in the cold air. Close enough that I had to lower the loudspeaker slightly to see his face clearly. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, almost grandfatherly. "You must be cold," he said in perfect Arabic. "We've prepared soup. Please, take some." The words hung in the air between us. My mind went blank. I had prepared for arguments. I had prepared for hostility. I had prepared for police and lawyers and media confrontations. I had not prepared for kindness. Behind him, the volunteers began moving through the crowd. Not aggressively. Not even confidently. Just quietly offering blankets and cups of hot soup to anyone who would take them. To the people who had come to protest them. To the people who had been chanting for their eradication just moments before. I stood frozen, the loudspeaker heavy in my hand, staring at this old priest who looked at me like I was someone worth caring about. And for the first time in my life, I had absolutely no idea what to do next. The chants died completely. 200 people stood in confused silence, watching volunteers move among them with soup and blankets. The only sounds were footsteps on cobblestone and the quiet murmur of, "Please, take some," in Arabic, English, and what sounded like Somali. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't weakness. It was something else entirely. Something I had no category for. My hands tightened around the loudspeaker. I felt control slipping away, felt the narrative I'd carefully constructed beginning to crumble. I couldn't let that happen. I had 200 people watching me. Cameras recording. A message to send. I raised the loudspeaker to my mouth. "This is manipulation." My voice came out harsher than I intended, tinged with something that might have been desperation. "You offer food to hide your true intentions. You use charity as a weapon to convert desperate people who have nowhere else to turn. This is exactly what we came here to expose." Some in the crowd murmured agreement, but the energy had shifted. The righteous anger that had fueled us moments ago now felt uncertain, shaky. The priest didn't interrupt, didn't argue back, didn't defend himself. He just stood there, 3 feet away, waiting. His face remained calm, almost sorrowful. He let me finish. Let the echo of my words fade into the cold air. Let the crowd settle into an uncomfortable quiet. Then he spoke again, and his words cut deeper than any argument ever could. "We are not here to conquer you," he said softly. "We are here to love you, even when you hate us." Something inside my chest cracked. I had debated imams who challenged my interpretations. I had argued with politicians who questioned my methods. I had faced scholars who tested my knowledge of Islamic law. I had prepared for every possible rebuttal, every logical counterargument, every accusation they might throw at me. I had not prepared for mercy. The volunteers continued their quiet work. An older woman offered a blanket to a young man who had been shouting the loudest just minutes ago. He stared at her, conflicted, then slowly reached out and took it. A volunteer handed soup to a mother who had brought her teenage daughter to the protest. The mother accepted with a whispered, "Shukran, thank you." Not everyone accepted. Some protesters turned away angrily, insulted by the offer. Some shouted that they didn't need Christian charity. But others hesitated. Others looked at the steam rising from the cups and saw simple kindness, not a trap. I watched one of my own security men, a former soldier I'd hired specifically because of his intimidating presence, accept a cup of soup from a young volunteer. When the volunteer smiled and said, "God bless you, brother," the security man lowered his eyes, embarrassed. Not by the blessing, but by his own participation in something that now felt cruel. We had come here to frighten these people, to make them stop, to defend our faith with strength and volume and righteous anger. And they had responded with soup. The priest turned back to me. His eyes held no triumph, no smugness, just that same impossible gentleness. "If you believe we are deceiving people," he said quietly, "then come inside. See everything. Ask anything you want. Look at our records, our programs, our intentions. Truth doesn't fear inspection." Prince Al-Faisal. He knew my name. Of course he knew my name. "Come inside," he repeated. "See for yourself." Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to maintain my position, to keep my distance, to not give them the satisfaction, to not appear weak in front of my supporters. But a different voice, quieter, deeper, whispered something else. "What if you are wrong?" I heard myself speak before I'd consciously made the decision. "Fine," I said, my voice tight. "Show me." The priest nodded, unsurprised, as if he'd known all along that I would say yes. He turned and walked back toward the church doors. After a moment's hesitation, after one glance at my confused supporters standing in the street holding blankets and soup, I followed. I had come here to expose their deception. Instead, I was walking straight into it. Or so I thought. The interior was nothing like I expected. No gold-leafed icons. No elaborate altars dripping with wealth. No marble columns or crystal chandeliers designed to impress and intimidate. Just plain wooden pews, whitewashed walls, and simple stained glass windows that cast colored light across worn stone floors. It looked humble. The priest led me past the main sanctuary and down a narrow staircase. My 2 bodyguards followed close behind, their presence a reminder that I was still in control, still protected, still able to leave whenever I wanted. At the bottom of the stairs, he pushed open a door. "These are our community rooms," he said simply. I stepped inside and stopped. The basement had been converted into classrooms. Tables and chairs arranged in clusters. Whiteboards covered with vocabulary words, Italian on one side, Arabic on the other. Bookshelves lined with language learning materials, job application guides, legal rights pamphlets. Children's drawings taped to the walls showing families, houses, boats crossing water. One drawing showed a church and a mosque side by side, holding hands. I moved to the bookshelves, scanning the titles. English grammar workbooks. Italian conversation guides. European employment law. Resume templates. And Bibles. Yes, there were Bibles. But there were also Qurans. I pulled one out, confused. It was well worn, pages soft from use. A donation label on the inside cover read, "Gift of the Islamic Community Center, for our brothers and sisters." This made no sense. "You keep Qurans here?" I asked, unable to hide my confusion. A woman's voice answered from behind me. "Of course. Some of our students want to pray. We provide space for that." I turned. A North African woman in her 40s stood in the doorway, wearing a modest hijab and an apron dusted with flour. She must have come from the kitchen where they'd prepared the soup. "I'm Amina," she said calmly. "I volunteer here 3 days a week." "You're Muslim," I said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She smiled slightly. "I have been my whole life. I will be until I die, inshallah." "Then why do you work with them?" The accusation in my voice was clear. She didn't flinch. "Because they needed help feeding hungry people. And I know how to cook for large groups." She paused, then added, "Some people come here for help and remain Muslim. Some ask questions about Jesus. We don't force either path. We just help." I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain how naive she was being, how she was being used, how she couldn't see the long-term strategy. But she looked neither naive nor used. She looked certain. The priest opened another door. "Our financial records are here. Program outlines. Volunteer schedules. Donation sources. Everything is available for inspection." He showed me filing cabinets, unlocked. Binders organized by year. Spreadsheets showing income and expenses, rent assistance, food costs, legal consultation fees, language teacher stipends. Everything documented, transparent, mundane. No locked rooms. No whispered conversations. No hidden agendas. We walked through 3 more classrooms. A children's play area with toys and books in multiple languages. A small kitchen where volunteers prepared meals. A prayer room, completely empty, facing east. For our Muslim guests, the priest explained. During program hours, we want everyone to be able to fulfill their religious obligations. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. Every door opened freely. Every question answered directly. Every assumption challenged by simple, visible truth. This wasn't a trap. This wasn't deception. This was exactly what it appeared to be. People helping people. As we climbed back up the stairs, something uncomfortable settled deep in my chest. A feeling I couldn't name. A crack in the foundation of everything I'd believed. Not doubt in Islam. I still believed in Allah, in the Quran, in the Prophet. But doubt in my assumptions. Doubt in the narrative I'd been taught. Doubt in my certainty that I understood exactly what was happening here. At the door, the priest turned to face me one last time. His eyes. I couldn't stop staring at his eyes. There was no fear of me, no pride in having proven me wrong, no satisfaction at my obvious discomfort. Just compassion. Genuine, inexplicable compassion. "You are welcome to return anytime," he said quietly. "To observe, to ask questions, to challenge us. Truth can withstand scrutiny." I nodded stiffly and walked out into the cold night air. My supporters had mostly dispersed. A few lingered in small groups, talking quietly. Some still held the cups and blankets they'd been given. I climbed into my vehicle without a word. As we drove away, I looked back once. The priest stood in the doorway, silhouetted by warm light from inside, watching us leave. I had come to expose their deception. Instead, I left carrying a question I couldn't answer. What if I was the one who had been deceived? 3 weeks passed, but I couldn't forget that night. The priest's eyes haunted me. The volunteer's kindness replayed in my mind during meetings, during prayers, during the quiet moments before sleep. The unlocked filing cabinets. The Quran sitting beside Bibles. Amina's calm certainty, we don't force either path. I tried to drown the thoughts in prayer. I prostrated myself 5 times a day, reciting familiar verses, asking Allah to restore my clarity. But even during sujood, with my forehead pressed to the prayer mat, my mind wandered back to that church basement. I threw myself into work. Conference calls with business associates. Meetings with religious leaders about funding new mosques. Public speeches about Islamic unity and Western cultural aggression. I said all the right words. I performed all the right gestures. But the certainty I'd always lived on, the absolute, unshakable conviction that had defined every decision I'd ever made, was leaking away like water through cupped hands. 4 weeks after the protest, I found myself in Rome on business. Or maybe I'd arranged the business meeting as an excuse to be there. I wasn't sure anymore. Late one night, I couldn't sleep. The hotel room felt suffocating. I told my security detail I needed air and walked out into the narrow Roman streets alone, pulling my coat tight against the November wind. I walked without direction for nearly an hour. Past closed cafes. Past ancient ruins spotlit in the darkness. Past churches, always churches, their crosses outlined against the night sky. And then I found myself standing in front of a bookstore. It was still open, some independent shop that kept late hours for tourists. Warm light spilled from the windows. I could see shelves packed with books in multiple languages. I stood on the sidewalk, staring. Go back to the hotel, I told myself. This is foolish. But my feet carried me forward. The bell above the door chimed as I entered. It's just research, I whispered to myself. Know your enemy. That's what Father always said. The religious section was in the back corner. I moved quickly, casually, pretending to browse other sections first. My heart pounded as if I were doing something criminal. I found the Bibles. Dozens of them. Different translations. Different languages. I grabbed one with an Italian and English parallel text, something I could read in my hotel room without raising suspicion from housekeeping. At the counter, I paid cash. The elderly clerk barely looked up, bored by another tourist buying another book. I tucked it deep in my coat pocket and walked back to the hotel, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. In my room, I locked the door, drew the curtains, sat on the edge of the bed with the Bible in my hands. I didn't read from the beginning. I opened it randomly to the Gospels, the accounts of Jesus' life that Christians claimed were eyewitness testimonies. I told myself I was looking for contradictions, proof of corruption, evidence of the lies I'd been taught about. But what I found was something entirely different. Jesus speaking with an authority that made religious leaders furious. Jesus forgiving sins, something only God could do. Jesus accepting worship from people who fell at his feet. Jesus telling his followers to love their enemies, to pray for those who persecute them, to turn the other cheek. This wasn't the Jesus I'd been taught about in Islamic school. Not the simple prophet who performed miracles and preached monotheism. Not the human messenger who pointed people toward Allah and nothing more. This Jesus claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life. This Jesus said no one comes to the Father except through him. This Jesus let a man call him, my Lord and my God, without correction. I read for hours. Not systematically, just fragments, jumping between passages, unable to stop. The words didn't sit passive on the page. They felt alive, active, like they were reading me instead of the other way around. Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. The priest's face flashed in my mind. His gentle voice, we are here to love you, even when you hate us. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I closed the book, my hands trembling. If the Bible was false, if it was corrupted and unreliable like I'd been taught, then why did it resonate so deeply? Why did these words feel more true than anything I'd read in years? The question was dangerous. The kind of question that could unravel everything. I hid the Bible at the bottom of my suitcase, beneath clothes and documents. I told no one. Not my advisors. Not my colleagues. Certainly not my family. Discovery would end everything. My title. My inheritance. My safety. But I couldn't stop reading. And with every page, the question grew louder. What if everything I've been taught is wrong? I carried the question like an open wound that wouldn't heal. Every day became a performance. I stood in prayer halls reciting verses I'd memorized as a child, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. I attended meetings with religious scholars and nodded at the right moments, but their certainty, the same certainty I'd once possessed, now seemed like a wall I could no longer see past. I was going through the motions of being Prince Khalid al-Faisal, while someone else lived inside my skin, asking questions I couldn't silence. 2 months after Rome, I was back in my hotel suite in Geneva. It was 3 in the morning. I'd been staring at the ceiling for hours, the Bible hidden in my briefcase across the room like a bomb waiting to detonate my entire life. The pressure finally broke. I sat up in bed, alone in the darkness, and spoke aloud, not a formal prayer, not the careful words I'd been taught, but raw desperation. God, whoever you are, show me the truth. My voice cracked on the last word. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know who you are. If you are Allah and Islam is right, show me. If you are something else, show me that too. Just show me the truth. Please. Silence. The hotel room remained dark and empty. No voice from heaven. No miraculous sign. No sudden clarity. Nothing happened. Days passed. Then weeks. I returned to Saudi Arabia, carrying my secret like contraband. The Bible stayed hidden at the bottom of my luggage, wrapped in clothes, invisible to customs agents and household staff. I moved it to a locked drawer in my private study, a room where no one entered without permission. But I couldn't hide what was happening inside me. During prayer, I caught myself staring at the prayer mat instead of focusing on the words. During business meetings, my responses came a half-second too slow, my confidence fractured by doubt I couldn't express. At family dinners, I smiled and participated, but felt like I was watching myself from a distance. My father noticed first. You seem distracted, he said one evening after dinner, his tone concerned but probing. Is something troubling you? Just work, I lied. International investments. Complex negotiations. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. But I saw the question in his eyes. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what. My younger brother asked if I was sick. My mother wondered if I was sleeping enough. Business associates commented that I seemed different in meetings, less decisive, less commanding. The facade was cracking. 6 weeks after my desperate prayer in Geneva, I found myself alone in my private residence in Riyadh. My staff had gone home for the evening. The house was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic. I stood at the window overlooking the city, watching lights flicker across the skyline. The call to Isha prayer had ended an hour ago. I hadn't gone to the mosque. I'd made an excuse: a headache, exhaustion, important calls to make. More lies. I was so tired. Tired of the questions. Tired of the doubt. Tired of carrying this weight alone. Tired of the war ragging inside my mind every moment of every day. I wasn't praying. I wasn't reading the Bible or the Quran. I wasn't doing anything except standing there, staring out at nothing, too exhausted to fight anymore. I had stopped asking questions. Stopped seeking answers. Stopped trying to figure it out on my own. I had simply surrendered. Not to Islam. Not to Christianity. Just to the exhaustion of not knowing. I can't do this anymore, I whispered to the empty room. I don't know what you want from me. And then, in that moment of complete surrender, of total emptiness, everything changed. The room shifted. Or maybe I shifted. Or maybe reality itself shifted. I was no longer alone. There was no sound, yet everything became louder than sound. No light, yet everything became clearer than sight. No touch, yet I felt a presence so tangible, so overwhelming, so real that my knees buckled. I fell. Not because I chose to. Because I couldn't remain standing. The presence filled the room like water filling a vessel, heavy with peace and authority, love and power, gentleness and absolute holiness. And in that moment, without words, without explanation, without doubt, I knew. I knew him. Not as a prophet. Not as a concept. Not as a theological argument. But as a person. Present. Real. Here. Jesus. I cannot explain what happened next in any scientific terms. There are no instruments that could have measured it. No cameras that could have captured it. No language adequate to fully describe it. But it was more real than anything I had ever experienced. There was no audible voice, yet communication flooded my being with a clarity that made human speech seem like whispers in a storm. No visible form, yet a presence manifested so tangibly that the air itself felt thick with reality I'd never before perceived. The room filled with something I can only describe as weight, not physical weight, but the weight of absolute truth, infinite love, perfect holiness. Peace and authority combined in a way that should have been contradictory but wasn't. The presence of someone so far above me that I should have been terrified, yet so intimately concerned with me that fear dissolved into wonder. I fell forward onto my face. Not because I decided to. Not because I was trying to show respect. My body simply couldn't remain upright in the presence of this glory. It was involuntary worship. And in my spirit, deeper than thought, more certain than any knowledge I'd acquired through study or reason, I knew him. Jesus. Not as the prophet I'd been taught about in Islamic school. Not as a wise teacher whose words were twisted by later followers. Not as a historical figure safely contained in the past. As God. Present. Personal. Powerful. The knowing didn't come through my mind. It bypassed intellect entirely and settled in the deepest part of my being where truth lives beyond argument. The same way you know your own name, the same way you know you exist, I knew him. I didn't see him with my physical eyes, yet I perceived him with a clarity that made physical sight seem dim and limited. Not an image, but a knowing. Not a vision, but a reality. Love poured over me, love without condition, without manipulation, without the subtle demands that human love always carries. This love didn't need me to perform, to prove myself worthy, to earn it through devotion or righteousness. It simply was. Complete. Unconditional. Overwhelming. And power. Power without cruelty. Authority that didn't crush or dominate or control, but lifted, held, protected. The kind of power that could speak galaxies into existence, but chose to whisper gently to one broken man in a dark room in Riyadh. Words formed in my spirit. Not sounds in my ears, but communication more direct than speech could ever be. You are searching. And I am here. The simplicity shattered me. All my questions, all my theological debates, my careful arguments, my intellectual pride, melted away like ice under sunlight. None of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered. He was here. That was all that mattered. I wept. Not from fear, though I was in the presence of infinite holiness. Not from shame, though every hidden sin of my life lay exposed before him. I wept from relief. The striving ended. The performance stopped. The war inside my mind ceased. For 34 years, I had worked to prove myself, to my family, to my community, to Allah, to myself. I had built an identity on certainty, on being right, on defending truth through my own strength and intelligence. And in one moment, all of it collapsed. But I wasn't falling. I was being caught. The weight I'd carried for months, the questions, the doubt, the fear of discovery, the exhaustion of pretending, lifted away. Not because I'd figured out the answers. Not because I'd earned relief through right belief. But because he had found me. I surrendered. Not the careful, conditional surrender of a defeated enemy, but the complete, total, irreversible surrender of a child who finally stops running and falls into the arms of a father who's been chasing him with love all along. Yes, I whispered into the carpet, my face wet with tears. Yes, I believe. You are real. You are God. You are Lord. The presence remained, not diminishing, but settling, filling every corner of the room, every corner of my heart. For the first time in my entire life, I felt peace. Not the temporary peace that comes from winning an argument or completing a task. Not the false peace of certainty based on incomplete information. But true rest. Deep rest. The rest of knowing I was exactly where I was meant to be, known completely and loved anyway. I don't know how long I lay there. Time seemed meaningless. The presence gradually faded, or perhaps I gradually returned to normal perception, unable to sustain that level of awareness. But when I finally sat up, wiping tears from my face, everything had changed. The room looked the same. The city lights still flickered outside the window. The clock showed only 20 minutes had passed. But I was not the same man who had stood at that window. I had encountered Christ. And there was no going back. The spiritual encounter faded as dawn broke over Riyadh, but the change remained. I sat at my desk watching the sunrise, knowing with absolute certainty two things: Jesus Christ was Lord, and I could not hide this truth forever. For 3 weeks, I tried. I performed my duties, attended meetings, smiled at family gatherings. But something fundamental had shifted. When my father invited me to speak at an anti-Western conference focused on Christian cultural invasion, I found myself unable to say yes. I'm too busy with business matters, I said, the light tasting like ash in my mouth. His eyes narrowed. You are never too busy to defend Islam. When a coalition of Muslim leaders asked me to fund a campaign against Christian missionaries in North Africa, I declined. When my brother wanted me to co-sign a public statement condemning Christian conversions, I made excuses. The silence became suspicious. My mother cornered me after Friday prayers. You haven't led a single public initiative in months. People are asking questions. Your father is worried. I'm fine, I said. Just reassessing priorities. But I wasn't fine. I was transforming. And transformation cannot be hidden indefinitely. The truth emerged not through confession, but through discovery. My younger brother found the Bible in my study. He'd been looking for a document I'd promised to review, and had opened the wrong locked drawer. The Bible fell out, pages marked with notes in my handwriting. He brought it to my father. That evening, my father came to my residence alone. He didn't knock. He had keys to every property in the family compound. He placed the Bible on my desk. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is," he said, his voice dangerous and quiet. I could have lied. Could have claimed it was research, a way to better argue against Christianity. Could have performed one more time. But I was done performing. "I believe Jesus is the Son of God," I said simply. "I believe He died and rose again. I believe He is Lord." My father's face went pale, then red with rage. "You have lost your mind. You've been deceived. This is temporary insanity, and we will fix it." But we both knew there was no fixing this. Within 24 hours, everything I'd relied on disappeared. My father convened a family council. I was given one choice: publicly renounce Christ and recommit to Islam, or lose everything. I chose Christ. Protection vanished overnight. The title, Prince, became meaningless, a word without power, respect, or safety. Friends who had laughed at my jokes and supported my initiatives became strangers who wouldn't meet my eyes. Business partners terminated contracts. Colleagues deleted my number. My uncle, a man I trusted, a man who had attended my graduation from LSE, delivered the final warning privately in my residence. "Leave the country," he said quietly. "Tonight. Because if you stay and continue this path, we cannot guarantee your safety. Not even from family. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I understood perfectly. I left Saudi Arabia under cover of darkness, with 2 suitcases and the clothes on my back. No entourage. No security detail. No farewell. Just a middle seat on a commercial flight to Istanbul, traveling under documents arranged by contacts who owed me favors. My inheritance, gone. My position in the family, erased. Even my name became dangerous to use. I lost everything the world values: wealth, status, power, family approval, cultural identity. But I gained something infinitely more valuable: peace that surpasses understanding. Today, I live quietly in a European city under a different identity. The details don't matter, for my safety and for the safety of those who helped me. I work with a refugee assistance program. Full circle. Now I serve the same people I once accused churches of exploiting. I help them find housing, learn languages, navigate legal systems. Some are Muslim. Some are Christian. Some are searching, just like I was. I worship in small chapels where no one chants slogans, where no one dominates, where no one fears. Just sincere believers gathering to worship the one who gave everything for us. Sometimes, walking past a church in the evening, I remember that cold November night. The loudspeaker in my hands. The absolute certainty. The chants, "Eradicate Christianity." I remember the moment those heavy wooden doors opened. The irony is almost too perfect. I went there to eradicate Christianity. Instead, I encountered Christ. Everything changed. Not just my beliefs, but my identity, my purpose, my understanding of what it means to be alive. What I lost was everything the world considers valuable: money, power, prestige, family honor. What I gained was everything that truly matters: truth, peace, purpose, and a relationship with a God who loved me enough to pursue me even when I was his enemy. I am no longer Prince Khalid Al-Faisal. That man died the night Jesus revealed himself in my residence. I am simply Khalid now, a follower of Christ, a servant of the refugees, A testimony to the reality that God's love is more powerful than hatred, that His truth is more precious than comfort, and that losing everything for Him means gaining the only thing that lasts forever. This is my story. This is my testimony. And if you are searching like I was, if certainty has given way to questions, if pride has cracked enough to let doubt seep in, then know this. He is searching for you too. And when you finally stop running, you'll discover He was there all along, waiting with arms open wide.